All right, welcome back, and today we're going to be doing another strategy video. This one is about the first of the integrated tasks. This is the campus situation summary, where you have to make a summary of some campus situation. And as I mentioned in the summary video for this task, this is a conversation between two people. It will almost always be a man and a woman. I would say always, but there's a possibility that it could be two women or two men, but just from a logical standpoint, because it would be easier to differentiate between the two voices, it will probably always be a man and a woman having a conversation. So in this one, as mentioned in the summary video, you read some sort of bulletin or notice that has to do with something on campus. This would be something you would see either on a physical bulletin board or maybe in a forum, student forum, or a message board or something like that. It's a very short notice that always will present some sort of a change or a problem. And then you will listen to the people speak about it, and one of the people will always have a problem with the change. So then basically what you're doing here in your notes is you just have to write down what the problem is, the reasons for the problem, and then in another part of your notes, you just have to write down what the person's opinion is, because if you remember from the summary video, that this is the most important part. That you have to state what the person's opinion is, the person who has the problem with the problem. And then you have to explain why they have that opinion. Now, what makes this actually fairly easy is because the reasons that they have for not agreeing with the change or the problem is always going to be related directly to the reasons for the change or the problem. Now, it could be that the person does agree with it, but I would say 99.999% of the time, the person is always going to disagree with or have a negative view about the problem. The reason for that is it's just a lot easier to discuss. So the makers of the exam, they have to come up with these different situations for the exam, and the exam changes every week. So it's just easier for them to have a situation where the person does not like the change or the problem that's listed in the text. So we discussed in the strategy page that for this one, since you will already know what the directions for this task are, just spend the time after you read the text just relaxing, taking a few deep breaths, because after you hear the directions and the actual text comes up on your screen, you have 45 seconds to read that text. Now, you might choose to read, skim through it very quickly so that you find what the problem and the change is and what the reasons for that are. And then you may want to read it over again if you have the time. But really, if you have the problem or the change and you have the reasons for that and you have some time left over, just relax. But this is the most important thing. Once the passage appears on your screen, you write what the problem or the change is. Now, here's another little tip, is that the problem or the change is almost always going to be stated in the title of the text. Now, it could be that you get a text that doesn't have a title, but I've never heard of that actually happening. So usually the actual problem or the change is the title of the text. And then you just have to find out what the reasons for this are. Next, when you're listening to the audio file, you're going to have to listen for the opinion of the person who has something against it. Like I said, they will almost always be against it just because it's a lot easier to talk about something that you are against. It could be that the person is for it, but most likely they will be against it. So that's the person whose opinion you have to listen for. The other person might give some other information, but what that person says is not important for giving your answer, because the person who has the opinion is going to be giving reasons for their opinion, and that's what you have to talk about. Like I said here, the reasons for their opinion are always going to be directly related to the reasons in the actual reading section. So here, this is an example of the information that you might put onto your page, as I did right here. First of all, you write down what the problem or the change is, and a brief description, just a few words to say what the reasons are, and then you might choose to put man and woman on your page and split it down the center. You could also just put person 1, person 2, or just, put a line down the center. You know that this is the first person, this is the second one. It's easier, though, if you just write man, woman. That way, whoever has the opinion, you just write all the notes on that side. So when you're speaking about it, you don't accidentally say, well, the man didn't like the idea because that's not the person you're supposed to speak about. You're supposed to be, in this example, speaking about the woman's opinion. So you just write down all the information on that side of your page. Now, up here, you'll notice that on this page within the course, I gave an example of the type of information that you have to skim for in the actual text. And I crossed out the information that would not be important. So I highlighted the information which would be the things that are the most important. So it's the title, Sculpture Course Discontinued. The sculpture program will be eliminated. The main reason is the lack of student interest. Although students increased, fewer art majors taking sculpture classes. Only sculpture professor is retiring this year. Doesn't make sense to hire a new full-time professor. That's all the information that you need. So then down here in your notes, you could just copy the title, Sculpture Course to be discontinued. Or you could just write Sculpture Course discontinued. Reason 1, lack of student interest. That's written up here. Lack of student interest. Reason 2, professor retiring. That's the professor retiring right here. And then they gave a further example that it doesn't make sense to hire a new professor, but that's related directly to this one. So I wrote excuse rationalization, doesn't make sense to hire a new professor. And then in the example, I can't play it here for you, but it's in the course and you'll hear it. Actually, that's up in this audio file, but you'll hear that the woman doesn't agree with the situation. And the reason she doesn't agree is because she says that it's not that the students are uninterested, they just don't have time. She also says that they have too many requirements that take up all their time. So that's related to the first one. And then they just, the problem is they need requirements. So all of these ones are related. Now, you probably won't have enough time to make your page look like this, but this is just an example of how you can organize the information. Reason 1, students uninterested. Reason 2, can't hire a professor. These are the details about the reason. So thinks they're being drastic, they should hire a part-time professor. Many other teachers, and she gave the example of the painting teacher, could be good at sculpting. So these are some of the reasons. So when you give your response, and of course you will be practicing with a timer because you only have 60 seconds to give your response, but then you would just use this and this information to give your response. So it could be something like this. So in the notice, we learned that the sculpture course is going to be discontinued because there is apparently a lack of student interest and the only sculpture professor is retiring, and they say it doesn't make sense to hire another professor. Now, the woman said that she doesn't really agree with the situation because she says it's not that the students are uninterested, it's just that they don't have enough time because they have too many requirements and they just need to have less requirements. The other reason she said was that she thought they were being drastic by not wanting to hire another professor because they could hire a part-time professor or even one of the professors that teaches another class, like the painting class, could also be the new sculpting professor. And so that's mainly why she doesn't really like the idea about the change. Okay, so I didn't really time that, but that's basically the structure of how you would use the information that you get from your notes to formulate a proper response. So now I mentioned before, don't spend time describing this and then describing the audio file. And then I did describe the change and the reasons briefly. But you don't want to give a really long, thorough explanation of what you read here and then go to this. You just want to mention the change and the reasons briefly, and then you give more of the information about these when you're describing what the person said. So you notice that the example fits right in with the strategy here. First, state the problem or the change. You probably also maybe want to give a brief description of their reasons. As I mentioned, it really just one sentence. They said that it's because they have lack of student interest and their only professor is retiring. Okay, that only takes a few seconds. So state the problem or the change, and then you have to make sure that you state the person's opinion. You don't have to state it immediately right away when talking about it, but you have to make it absolutely clear what the person's opinion is, because that's one of the most important parts of this task. Now, as I state here, you can describe the person's opinion at the same time that you are showing how it either supports or agrees with. You know, you could say, she doesn't like this idea because even though they said this, she also brought up this idea. Or she doesn't agree with this idea because, as she stated here, she says this. So you don't actually have to say, her opinion is bad. You just have to make it clear in what you're saying what the opinion is. And then just make sure that when you're practicing with this particular task, you practice with a timer. This is the same with all of the speaking tasks. And just keep practicing the same answer over and over again until you get it down to being almost exactly 1 minute. And it's not difficult. Once you learn how to put down the correct information and then use that information like I did in the example here and also the example on this page, you can listen to this audio file and look at the notes at the same time, and you'll see how I did it there. It's almost the same way as I just explained in this video, but practice with that timer over and over until you get it down to, 59 seconds. And then once you know exactly what that actually feels like, and you know how fast you're supposed to be speaking, how much information that you put into your response, what information that you leave out, because you'll notice that I didn't add every single bit of information that I wrote down here. You just use it as a guideline. And then once you get that down perfectly, find another example. We have other examples in this course. Use those examples and then practice that one over and over and over until you get it done perfectly. And if you do that with enough examples where you have your answer perfectly for that, even if they ask you a completely different question in the exam, you'll know exactly how to answer it. You'll know how much information to put in. You'll know how fast to speak and how slow to speak, and you'll do it just perfectly. So that's basically it for the strategy for this first integrated task in the speaking section. So thank you for stopping by, and we will see you in the next lesson.